Hello dear friends, this is my second video release, and my previous one it was mostly a presentation, and I want to be more specific in this release, and I want to speak about um, actual topic or actual subject about the Third World War. I would actually identify this video release like on the uh, threshold of the Third World War. I would like to speak first of all about the mechanism of generation of wars. To understand that, I'm trying to look at the picture of the world, and I can find out that we can we can find two types of systems on the globe today: democracies and autocracies. We take democracies as the apogee of the social development, as the biggest progress in the civilization. And actually, autocracies, they recognize this fact because a lot of countries who are autocracies by the matter of fact, at the same time they declare they are democracies, and they decorate themselves by democratic procedures to make an impression they are democratic. By this fact, even autocracies recognize that democracy is more advanced than autocracy. So that is, just the status quo we have for now. And right now, to find why there are democracies and autocracies and how they're different to each other, we can find out if to look retrospectively to see the historic development of mankind, that the whole development of mankind is the uh, like seek of elites to find the sources to motivate labor of the nation, to make the labor more productive, more efficient. And the best way to motivate the labor is to provide humans with rights and liberties. So, in the case when you have, when the government has pretty much natural, labor, or territorial resources, they have a source for extensive development. They can develop by restricting or expanding the control over those resources. If the country is limited and they have not enough of such resources to develop, they have to look for an alternative. And the only alternative to extensive way of development is an intensive way of development. An intensive way of development means to motivate labor so much that it will affect finally the intensive way of development of the production. So democracy is the system which provided maximum of human rights and liberties, and for now it is the best political motivation system. Just motivating the labor. So that's why those nationalities which has a lack of resources, the best way for them to develop intensively and to practice democratic way of development. And for those countries who have enough resources, there is no need to develop intensive way of development because they can expand by controlling all these resources. So, just that's like two different reasons, and I think they are in the basis of the generation of democracies and autocracies. Of course, a big factor is a political culture, and I mean just uh, but just from the point I'm going to analyze the whole situation. Just anyway, I want to put attention to the reasons why one or other nationalities choose democracy or autocracy. I think there is a plan. Just a big impact, a big influence of economic reasons. So then, let us see how these systems work? What's the difference between these two systems? In democracies, they have electoral system. When the authorities are elected, they have electoral cycles. Um, there is a functional division of powers, and there is a free market economy. In autocracies, there is a just opposite situation. Uh, Local political elite tries to be at the power by any means as long as possible. So they are not interested very much in elections as a mean of keeping control over the power. They have no functional division of powers, so it means that human rights and liberties are pretty much restricted, and they would like to control businesses as well. That's why they don't like to practice too much. I mean, just like economic free market economy. In other words, uh, they stream for political and economic monopoly. So that's the basic features of these both systems. So how these features are realized in the behavior of those two systems? Democratic system works in the following way. So local political elites, they try to get votes of the population. In order that they have to please the population, uh, promising them, I mean, just satisfaction of their needs immediately or within an electoral cycle for which they are going to be elected. There is a big, I mean, just they are motivated. They need to be popular. The populism is generated in this, I mean, just in this manner, and so there is a situation when political elite is oriented mostly on current interests and incentives against long-term interests and incentives. So long-term interests, short-term or current interests and incentives dominate over long-term. If we look uh, at the free market economy, so we can find that businesses are trying to seek more profits. So chasing the profits, it's the main idea of a business. So from this point, we can see that economic interests and incentives are dominating over all other social interests and incentives. So these two features of democracy, they are pretty substantial because domination of uh, of short-term interests make people uh, make decisions oriented on current to resolve current issues mostly, to satisfy immediately. In other words, they want to satisfy people as soon as possible, and uh, and uh, seeking for profits makes the system to sell itself as at higher price as it possible. So it means that the system is interested to sell itself as fast as possible and at a higher price as possible. So if try to find, I mean, just to compare it ideographically, it is kind of behavior of a street prostitute. So that's a feature we can find. I mean, the type of behavior we can find because of this disintegration of interests. If we look to autocracies, we can find a little bit different picture. The disintegration of interests, autocracies, they're based on restriction of freedoms and liberties, on persecutions, on repressions. Uh, they need to expand their control over the resources in the favor of the elite which is in power. So it means that the disintegration of interests and incentives goes in a little bit different way. Here's the interests and incentive of one person or of a group of persons from the political elite. They dominate over the public interests and incentives. So it works in that way. So another way they behave them in the way of repressions, aggressions, and ideographically, you can compare them with the behavior of a street hooligan or even a robber. So then, after all this, we can find that these two systems, just democracies and autocracies, they have differences, and that's why they should contradict between each other. But then we can find that there is a reason for also symbiosis between these two systems. And we can find that the current world develops in the paradigm of autocracy-democracy symbiosis. Democratic countries trying to satisfy, to make profits as soon as possible, they put their attention to those resources which are in the hands of autocracies. And autocracies cannot use these resources effectively because they are extensive. They practice extensive way of development. And democracies, they know how to use these resources in more effective, in more intensive way. They can intensify the exploitation of these resources, and they can get profits from such cooperation with autocracies. So that's why democracies, they like very much to cooperate with autocracies. And that's the way how the economic collaboration between democracies and autocracies does work. So democracies, when they attend such kind of collaboration, they make investments and export of technologies to autocracies. Autocracies also interested in cooperation with democracies because democracies provide them with the technologies in how to intensively, technologies which allow them intensively use their resources in their own favor. In this way, democracies become more rich, they get more money. Autocracies also become more rich and they get more money. The idea, the goal, the incentive of democracies is to become more rich and more rich and more rich. But the basic orientation, the goal of autocracies is to become stronger, to expand their influence, to expand their control as much as possible. So when the potential of political and social and economic potential of autocracies grows up, so it means that they are going to make more repressive policy inside the country to control more and more, because they get this potential, and they just realize the algorithm of which is implanted in these systems to control the resources. So first they make persecutions inside their own societies, but then when they establish more or less complete control over those resources inside the country, they start paying attention to the resources which outside the country. And then they try to make foreign, outside, just international expansion by different means. And then, just when they expand more and more, then it comes also to a military aggression against other countries. It is interesting, very interesting, but we can find out through the history that even the aggression of autocracies against other countries, including democracies, doesn't stop democracies to collaborate with autocracies. They still continue to collaborate with autocracies, stimulating, supporting autocracies to become more aggressive. Uh, and actually, I'm going to provide several historic uh, examples to show how it does work. And only when the behavior of the aggressor becomes uh, dangerous, it starts to perform the existential threat to democracies, then democracies start to distance autocracies, start to conflict them. And that's the way the wars are going to get generated. First on a regional scale, and then they expand up to a world scale. So that's, I see, the way of generating of wars, including world wars. And then I want to just bring you some examples, historic examples, how it does work. Example number one, the assassination in Sarajevo of the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 2014, the subsequent declaration of war by Austro-Hungary against Serbia on July 28, 2014, and the beginning of mobilization in Russia in support of Serbia gave Germany a reason to declare war on Russia on August 1st, 2014, and then to France and on France and on Belgium, which led to the involvement of Great Britain in the war as well, because Great Britain had an agreement with Belgium to protect it in case of aggression against Belgium. So there was an aggression of Germany against Russia and those European countries that were considered at the time democratic countries, that is, against democratic Europe. And the war of two blocks, just the development of war was in the way when two blocks had the same economic and military potential, and that's why no one of blocks was capable to like defeat another. At the same time, the United States declared its neutrality, even though the actions of Germany were directed, including ultimately against the United States. The actual refusal of the United States from the solidarity protection of democratic countries led to the fact that the war became protracted and rapidly expanded due to the fact that none of the European military political blocs participating in the war had a military advantage. As a result, all European countries were gradually involved in the war, including the colonies of the European imperialistic metropolis around the world, as well as Asian empires. The war has become a world war. About 9 million people died in battles, and more than 5 million civilians died as a result of military occupation, bombing, hunger, and disease. The consequences of the war were catastrophic for the national economy of most countries. Direct military losses of the warring countries amounted to $208 million and exceeded 12 times the gold reserves of European countries. A third of the national wealth of Europe was destroyed. The war led to political destabilization in the world, and as a result, to the worldwide spread of communism and the foundation of the first stable communist regimes in the territory of former Russian Empire and Mongolia. We experience the consequences of the spread of communism to this day. In particular, such are the military and thermonuclear threats from post-communist Russia and communist China, which pose an existential threat to all mankind. I would like to tell that the loss of value, just those damages which were and murders which were brought to Europe That's one part of the deal. But another part is long-term consequences, like foundation of communism in the world. And that's the result of the First World War because it became so long. And that's why I mean just with so hard consequences. At the same time, the neutrality of the United States in war, which led to the listed consequences, did not protect the United States from the inevitable entry into the war on April 6, 2017, after the sinking of the American passenger ships Lusitania and Sussex by German submarines, German diversions in the United States, and the attempts of Germany to involve Mexico and Japan in the war against the US. The entry of the United States into the war led to a tilt in the balance of power in favor of the Entente and the rapid defeat of the Triple Alliance in Germany, which, if it had happened early, could have prevented the consequences of this war, which continued to pose an existential threat to the world to this day. This was the example number one. Example number two, the USSR. The USSR, the world's first communist power, formed as a result of the collapse of the Russian Empire as a consequence of the First World War, remained a predominantly agrarian and industrial undeveloped country in the late 20s and early 30s. Industrialization began in the USSR. The creation of heavy military industry as a part of a plan for world conquest and the building of communism throughout the world after the total destruction of capitalism and democracy throughout the world. It was actually the strategic idea of communist countries and of communist movement in the world. Despite all this, about 20,000 specialists and many companies from the industrial countries of the West helped build an industry in the USSR, which became the second in the world in industrial production. These were mainly American and German specialists and companies, in particular Ford Motor Company, Austin Company, Albert Kahn Corporation, Siemens, General Electric, Junkers, Arthur McKee of Cleveland, and others. On June 1, 1931, a contract was signed between the USA and the USSR on the participation of American engineers in the construction of 90 Soviet metallurgical plants. Most of the enterprises built during the years of industrialization are the brainchild of Kahn, whose specialists created the most detailed documentation for such giants of the Soviet industry as tractor factories in Stalingrad, Kharkov, Chelyabinsk, foundries in Dnepropetrovsk, Magnitogorsk, Sormovo. All factory equipment was produced in the USA and then sent by ships to the USSR, where under the control of Kahn's people, the factories were assembled and productions were launched in pre-built walls. Kahn's firm designed and set up almost 600 enterprises, and in total, with the help of foreign companies, 1,500 plants and factories were built in the USSR. The Stalingrad tractor plant was built in the USA, dismantled, transported on 100 cargo ships, and then assembled in the USSR. The Gorky automobile plant was built by the American company Austin and produced clothes of Ford cars. The Dnieper hydroelectric powered station was built by the American company Cooper Engineering Company together with the German Siemens, and chief engineer was Hugh Cooper, and the equipment was supplied by General Electric. The Moscow Auto Factory, named after Lenin Young Communist League, is an exact copy of the Ford Standard plant from the city of Dearborn. The Magnitogorsk Iron and Steel Works is a clone of an iron and steel works in Gary, Indiana. All this happened against the background of terrible political repressions in the USSR, mass arrests, executions, and deportations. During the period of Stalin terror, the total number of those convicted for offenses is at least 40 million, of which 835,000 were shot, and up to 6.5 million people were deported. During transportation and while in exile, at least 1.2 million people died. That is approximately 1 in 5. During the famine of 1933, more than 7 million people died of starvation in the USSR, while 1.7 million tons of grain and 31,500 tons of flour were exported from the USSR. The proceeds from the sale of which went to pay for the services of foreign specialists and companies. As a result, American and European governments, specialists and companies have created with their own hands the military industrial potential of their own enemy, which for almost the entire last century and this century has been and still a military and existential threat to the whole world. This is the example number 2. Then, the example number 3, the Second World War. The Second World War became possible after the Nazi state was formed in Germany. The military-industrial potential of the country grew to such an extent that Germany was able to launch military aggression against several European countries, and the democratic world at that moment restricted at the level of political declarations and attempts to appease the aggressor at the expense of territorial concessions from other countries, while largely continued trade and economic cooperation with the Nazi state, in fact, more supporting its aggressive expansion than counteracting it. The military escalation spiral of World War II developed similar to that of World War I. Germany captured almost all of continental Europe, and Great Britain was left alone defending itself from a German attack. The US still refused to enter the war until its Pacific fleet was destroyed by Japanese aircraft at Pearl Harbor. As a result, the war turned out to be again protracted and again expanded to a global scale, instead of being localized and neutralized at the stage of the birth and growth of an aggressive Nazi state in Germany. There is just to tell that, in 1936, Germany brought its troops to Rhine demilitarized zone, and at that time Germany was so weak from the military point, so that European countries were capable easily to, just cut any attempts of Germany to make all these actions. But they didn't respond, although it was against the agreements which were made after the World War I. So in other words, just a small act maybe was could be enough to cut the spiral of growth of the Second World War, but it didn't happen. The result of the war claimed more than 55 million human lives. The losses of the world economy amounted to more than $4 trillion. More than 10,000 settlements were destroyed, and agriculture and industry in Europe were paralyzed for a long time. And then the long-term consequences again. As a result of the war in the world, instead of one communist state, a communist bloc of states and a pro-communist belt of states that engulfed all countries was formed, all continents was formed, and humanity entered the era of the Cold War, which was the existence of two blocs conflicting with each other on the verge of a thermonuclear war. This is the example number 3. Example number 4, China. The spread of communism as a result of World War II led to Soviet support for the civil war in China and the capture of the Chinese mainland by the communist movement in 1949, while the island of Taiwan, with several other islands, remained in the power of Chinese conservatives, where, as a result of a series of political reforms conducted by President Lee Teng-hui In the late 80s and early 90s, the country turned into a democratic state. As for mainland China, after the victory of the communist regime, a totalitarian communist system was established in the country. According to analysis of 10 different Western sources, a total 60 million people died during forced collectivization. Purges resulted in the deaths of 5 million people. The Great Leap Forward and the subsequent famine claimed 40 million lives. The Cultural Revolution claimed 7 million lives. The occupation of Tibet claimed about 1 million lives. In the Laogai camps, the world's largest network of concentration camps, about 20 million people died. Although China has made pragmatic changes and after the 80s embarked on the path of a socialist market economy that could soon make it the world's largest economy, power, dictatorship, and political repression remain in the country. Against this backdrop, on January 1, 1979, the Communist China and the United States formally established diplomatic relations and severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The joint communique on establishment of diplomatic relations between China and United States states, the United States of America recognizes that the government of the Communist China is the sole legitimate government of China. In October 1979, the United States granted China the status of most favored nation in trade, after which investment and technology flowed massively from the United States to China. As a result, thanks to these investments and technologies, China has become a world economic leader, one or two, with a powerful military and aggressive foreign policy, rhetoric that poses direct military threats to the United States. And for years now, the US has been criticizing and confronting China, accusing it of human rights violations, economic and political expansion, foreign policy aggressiveness, and military threats, while the US has pumped investments and technology into the communist regime with its own hands for the past 4 decades. Absurd, but true. You have to blame a mirror. In other words, this is a fun but a tragic story about China. And the fifth example. After the collapse of the USSR, the Russian Federation became its successor and dominant state entity on the territory of the former country. After the announcement of the course towards building democracy and market economy, parallel processes began in the country for the kleptocratic privatization of the former state property, which ended up in the ownership of oligarchic clans consisting mainly of persons close to the former KGB, and the concentration of political power in the hands of executive power. That's two results of the uh, transition trends in Russia, so that all former state property turned out to be in the hands of those criminal clans which are connected to the KGB, and the executive power became like the sole power, the dominant power in the country, also controlled by the KGB, by the matter of fact that Vladimir Putin from the KGB took this power on December 31st, 1999, without any elections. What it means? I will explain you what it means. It means that in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party was the head of the whole political system. And then they had an arm, right arm, which was executing repressions, red terror against the population. It was called the KGB. So then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and all these transitions in the Russian Federation, it became another, just a new phenomenon was born when the KGB became both and the repressive right hand and the head of the political system. That's why it is so close to be like a kind of uh, terroristic political organism. Uh, the result of these political transformations was the autocratic regime of people from the KGB and other special services decorated with democratic ritual procedures. This process finally took shape as a result of the transfer of power by Boris Yeltsin to the KGB appointee Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin came to power against the backdrop of the war in Chechnya, which was accompanied by the use of armed forces, heavy armed vehicles, aviation, and missile system against the civilian population. And the first political act of Vladimir Putin after his first inauguration was the arrest of the owner of the opposition television channel NTV, Vladimir Gusinsky, with subsequent seizure of this channel. If the that I told you, but once again to repeat, if the USSR, if in the USSR the head of the political system was the CPSU and its repressive, punishing hand was the KGB, then in modern Russia, the reformated KGB has become both the head and the punishing hand at the same time. Russia has become a politically repressive state waging aggressive wars around the world. On March 14, 1992, Russia organized an armed conflict in Moldova, creating an unrecognized puppet state on its territory, the Transnistrian Moldavian Republic. In August 2008, Russia carried out armed aggression against Georgia, creating two more puppet unrecognized states on its territory, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russia took part in military conflicts in Nagorno-Karabakh, Syria, and a number of African countries. In 2014, Russia committed armed aggression against Ukraine, annexing Crimea and creating puppet unrecognized states on the territory of Ukraine, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Russia's military aggression is accompanied with blackmailing, the use of nuclear weapons against Western countries, and threats to block gas and energy supplies to Europe. Russian special services carried out murders in the UK and a number of other European countries, including with the use of radioactive and chemical substances. On February 24, 2022, Russia committed a full-scale armed aggression against Ukraine with elements of the genocide of the Ukrainian people, terror of the civil population, and numerous war crimes. Such a result of political development in Russia is absolutely natural and absolutely predictable. The Western community and the governments of Western countries have been repeatedly warned the past 22 years, including by citizens of the Russian Federation, about the inevitability of such consequences, both through public and academic discussions and publications and through confidential channels. In particular, they were provided with information about the conduct of subversive activities by the Russian special services in Ukraine starting in 2005, the ultimate logic goal of which could be only the absorption of Ukraine by Russia. However, all this information was ignored by both the Western community and their governments and intelligence services. Against this background, Western states, right up to the start of the Russian war against Ukraine on February 24, 2022, were actually engaged in economic cooperation with Russia, pumping Vladimir Putin's political regime with investments and technologies, including military technologies. Right now, we can find, in those missiles which were intercepted by the air defense of Ukraine, they can find that up to 85% of details of these missiles are the products which were produced in Germany, France, and the United States. The result is sad. the political leadership of Russia threatens the West with a thermonuclear war if it loses the war in Ukraine, sending appropriate warning through its propaganda narratives. And actually, 2 days ago, Vladimir Putin, in his speech, he actually announced the thermonuclear threat to the Western community almost directly. So we face the result of this policy, foreign policy towards Russia for the last decades, I mean 2 decades at least, starting the date Vladimir Putin came to power on December 31st, 1999. The result of all this international politics of the United States and Western community is that right now the population of those countries have to face the reality of the thermonuclear attack and thermonuclear war of Russia against those countries. Congratulations. Mm, uh, in fact, the modern world is on the verge of World War III, or maybe it has already begun on February 24, 2022. And the spiral of this war is being unleashed by the Western democracies themselves through their unwillingness to adequately counter aggression. And only when the war in Ukraine made it possible for the governments of the Western democracies to see by a clear example that they would be the next in the event of the defeat of Ukraine, that this is the existential threat for them, only then they did begin to provide military and economic assistance to Ukraine while avoiding their direct participation in the war and rigidly dosing and limiting military assistance to Ukraine, resulting in massive destruction and loss of lives in Ukraine. The conclusion from this story is simple. Russia's war against Ukraine, like other Russian wars against other countries, is a direct and logical consequence of the economic collaborationism of Western democracies with the Russian political regime. Uh, these historical examples show that the result of the symbiosis of democracies and autocracies is a cyclic development in which democracies initially pump autocracies with investment and technologies which allow them later to build a military economic potential and to resort to regional and world wars, which stop only when democracies, against the backdrop of their existential threat, defeat the aggressors. And this cycle keeps repeating. It doesn't depend on the will of people and politicians, and it's objectively conditioned, as it is embedded in the algorithm of the behavior of democratic and autocratic systems. Hence, the conclusion that the solution to the problems lies in changing this algorithm, or at least in its correction. In ideographical comparison, this, just symbiosis or tandem of democracies and autocracies can be compared like a friendship of the street prostitute with the street hooligan up to the first conflict between themselves. And then the cycle is over, and then it starts again. And then I just put an attention that I'm not going to blame or to criticize Western governments. I want to show a different thing, that this kind of behavior is implanted in the algorithm of democracies. Uh, I don't want to criticize governments because it's the same like to criticize a cat for being a cat. You cannot persist a cat to be a dog. So that's why these critics will be not very much fruitful from this point. I think that the real decision to the problem is to change an algorithm which is implanted in the social organization, in the social system of democracies. And we can see that this kind of behavior is defected by the disintegration of interests, of current and long-term interests in the favor of current interests, and disintegration of economic interests in the favor of uh, so uh, just economic and social interests in the favor of economic interests. So that's why, in order to change this kind of behavior, it is to correct this algorithm by implanting a standard to make government decisions uh, with a filter, which will not allow them to make decisions based upon the disintegration of current and long-term interests and incentives, and between economic and social interests and incentives. I would like to attract attention of academic community to this problem, and I would like that this project, which I'm trying to carry out, will initiate in one or another way the development, just of this campaign or of this venture to uh, make researches, development, testing, and incubation of such algorithm, which can be done, to my point of view, in a virtual space, first of all, before its universal expansion outside the virtual space. Uh, Probably I will pay attention in my to this my proposal in next video releases. And right now, I also want to pay attention also to another subject. The changing of algorithm will change a lot of time so that our civilization can be destroyed several times before that. And that's why maybe it is to make some corrections of this algorithm. And I think that it could be done in the following way. Uh, I have an idea that maybe the behavior of the Western businesses, which will prevent them, restrict them from the collaboration with the evil regimes, can be realized through implementation of an institute, such a tool, which I call evil collaboration tax. Uh, I put it like really flat. It can, it, just we can find another term for this tax. It can be, for instance, identified as negative social consequences tax. But let me use the term which is more functional, evil collaboration tax. The tax which you have to pay because of the fact that you collaborated with an evil country, with an evil counterpart. Uh, just it is, what's the reason for this tax? It is very easily can be explained. Right now, for instance, when Ukraine became a victim of Russian aggression, United States governments provide financial, economic, and military assistance to Ukraine. And then all the nation has to pay taxes to provide all this assistance to Ukraine. But not all of the population did get the profits from collaboration with Russia. Not all the population. So why they have to pay? If there are some subjects, companies, businessmen who made this cooperation, who feeded Russia for this aggression through the collaboration, through the supporting of finances, investments, technologies to Russia, they have to pay all these expenses which are connected with the military and economic support of Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. So it means that anybody who made cooperation with a counterpart affiliated with the jurisdiction in which we can find a trend of progressing, of repressive trends inside the country, then this business is the subject to pay the evil collaboration tax. Uh, it can work in the following way, that it should be done like an institute of authorized political experts who made a conclusion for each company or business that during the certain reporting period, this business did or did not cooperate with a counterpart which is affiliated with the jurisdiction where where the repressive trend was critical during the reporting period. If the conclusion is positive, then this business subject, has to pay evil collaboration tax to the government. If the conclusion is negative, then the business is subject for tax exempt. If, for instance, the business did not has not the certification of this political expert, then anyway he has to pay this tax. Uh, this tax can stop, I mean, just a lot of businesses from such activities, which bring to the fact of feeding the repressive regimes around the world and to feed their aggressive potential. I mean, just right now, when we can see that uh, the subject for such tax in the United States, for instance, can be a lot of companies, from McDonald's to Martin Lockheed. All of them had their businesses in Russia and they feeded the Russian government. And right now we have the results of bleedy war in Ukraine. And not only bleedy war in Ukraine, we still have the opportunity that this war will become world war, and then it will become also thermonuclear war. And we can face thermonuclear attacks against the Western community as well. So that's basically all the subjects which I tried to cover it in this my video release. And I would like to continue the discussion in my next video release. And so for now, I would like, uh, okay, let me put one more idea. If I will feel that there is a support for my idea concerning the evil collaboration tax, I would be ready, by the way, to initiate a petition on the website of the Congress, on the US Congress, to develop the law concerning the implementation of the evil collaboration tax into the tax code of the United States. Now, that's it for this video release, and I'm just I would like to see you in my next video release. Thank you for attention and goodbye.